Welcome to the Next Gen Now Summit. I'm Sarah Sladek, your host. Over the course of the next 2.5 hours, you will hear best practices from leaders globally, emerging leaders as well as seasoned leaders with a shared goal of prioritizing the next gen now. Early in my career, I worked for 4 organizations struggling to understand and retain the talent of young people. This is still a challenge today. Research indicates employee engagement as well as membership engagement among young professionals is waning. This is a challenge, but it's also a huge missed opportunity because our workforce is trending younger now for the first time in over 3 decades. And the majority of the workforce is shifting to be comprised mostly of millennials as well as Gen Z. And this year, the oldest Gen Alphas turn 16 and start to enter the workforce, so we can expect more change to happen. Now, when you hear me share these stats and facts, what's your response? Do you feel excited? Do you want to learn more, dive in? Or do you feel overwhelmed, frustrated, want to pull back, keep things the same, hold on to status quo? Well, let me tell you, folks, either decision you make, either way, progress happens. Change continues. And either way, the future waits for no one. And that's why we need to get ready for the next generation now. Welcome to all of our presenters. It's an honor to have you here today. All these global leaders who are trendsetters and advocates and thought leaders in their particular areas of expertise. It's an honor to work with you. Thank you for being a part of the Next Gen Now Summit. So buckle in, get ready, because it's time to go. Welcome to the show, Sydney and Imogen. I'm really excited to have someone from Canada as well as someone from Australia tuning in for our global summit. So I would love for both of you just to briefly introduce yourselves to the audience, then we'll get to the good stuff. We'll get to the Q&A. Imogen, would you like to go first, please?
Sure, thank you for having me. I'm dialing in on Gadigal land in Sydney. My name's Imogen Kane. I'm a youth engagement specialist at UNICEF Australia and also the former Australian Youth Representative to the United Nations. And thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Fantastic. Glad you're here. And Sydney.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sydney. I'm joining you from Treaty 13 territory of Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, otherwise known as Toronto, Canada. I work at Mentor Canada. I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Initiatives.
All right, let's dive in. I expect this to be a really great conversation. Would you each just explain a little bit more about how and why each of you are advocating for young people right now in your respective roles? Sydney, if you would go first, please.
Absolutely. So from the perspective of Mentor Canada, we talk a lot about something called the mentoring gap. So we are looking to close the mentoring gap. And what that means for young people is that there's a lot of people who want mentorship in order to reach their leadership goals, but don't have it. Based on our research, there's more than 2 in 5 youth in Canada who did not have access to mentorship growing up. And then over 50% of young adults recall a time in their youth when they wanted mentorship but didn't have access to it. So one of the things that we're doing is really making sure that anyone who wants it, any young person, can access mentorship to reach their goals. And we do this by building the capacity of organizations that are working with young people. So that can really be anything. It can be a post-secondary institution like a trade school, a college, a university. It can be companies, governments, community
Wow.
and grassroots organizations anywhere across Canada. We're really focused on building their capacity to integrate quality mentoring into all the work that they do. And of course, we have some specific things too, like we work on mentorship in youth employment, things like mental health.
Mm.
We recently released a study on racialized youth as well. So we really try to approach this from an intersectional approach as well.
And I want to just ask a brief follow-up question for anyone who might be asking themselves, so how do you define mentoring and why is it important?
That's a great question. So I think I'll define maybe what a mentor is because that's probably more relatable to people. But really, we look at a mentor as a trusted person who is guiding someone along their journey. So they're not necessarily telling someone what to do, but really focusing on that young person. What are their goals? I also think there's kind of this myth around mentorship has to be an older person who's mentoring a younger person, but that's
Mhm.
totally not true. There's
Yeah.
lots of peer mentorship. There's younger people who mentor older people. So mentorship is pretty diverse, but we really look at it as being a reciprocal relationship. It's grounded in trust and it's really focused on the person. So making sure it's person centered.
Got it. Thank you for explaining. All right, Imogen, how and why are you advocating for young people right now?
Sure. I think I'll begin with the why, although that might be obvious to us. We do have to explain that in our work as UNICEF Australia, why children and young people are such an important group to not only advocate for, but advocate with. When we're talking to government, for example, we like to sort of flip it on its head in terms of children and young people are the largest stakeholder we see because they've got most skin in the game. They're going to be impacted by this policy going forward into the future the most than anyone else who's currently alive. And especially if we're making policy with young people in mind, that policy ideally will be future focused and helping future generations. So it actually ends up with better outcomes for not just children and young people, but society as a whole. In terms of how we do it, obviously everyone has their own approaches in the sector and they're all, needed. We try with advocacy, inside track advocacy with primarily government and through multilateral institutions like the United Nations. So that can look like a lot of things, but often it's upskilling young people to advocate for themselves and giving them those opportunities to meet directly with decision makers. We can open that door for them and they can articulate their own experience. We don't need to do that. And a lot of that also looks like working with the youth-led movement here in Australia. So we have a lot of partnerships where we're supporting in the background youth-led organisations where everyone is under 25, leading amazing work, specifically in my case in the climate movement. So that's the how and a bit of the why.
Fantastic. And a follow-up question for you, just for our audience who might not exactly know what UNICEF does, could you just give a little explanation?
Of course. So UNICEF is the largest children's charity in the world. It's part of the United Nations, hence why the UN in UNICEF. It's the International Children's Emergency Fund. Around the world, we basically ensure children and young people have everything they need to thrive. That looks a lot like stepping in conflict or disaster settings,
Mhm.
so emergency settings. But here in Australia, there's not such an acute emergency setting. So instead, it's more advocating research, putting forward best practice to government who can implement those changes themselves. And it's working with young people a bit more directly in that advocacy sense.
Thank you. Okay, so what is something you wish leaders knew more about when it comes to young people? And Imogen, if you go first this time.
Sure. Something that's been really interesting in terms of bringing leaders on this journey is actually getting them to treat young people as experts and as
Mm.
valued consultants. That's an ongoing message that we're trying to get across. Ultimately, young people have a unique experience in the world. They have unique needs and a unique perspective. And especially in advocacy, while youth are sometimes consulted, they're not considered as valued as other groups that are consulted. So often they're spoken to, and then it's like, great, thanks so much. And then they just push it to the side and nothing happens with it. So instead, we're trying to change that narrative that young people have a unique perspective. Often they are challenging the status quo, they have unique needs. Uh, when we're talking about, say, for example, climate change, it impacts them differently. They can bring that perspective to the discussion, and therefore their input must be valued as highly as anyone else's and therefore implemented. So that's one of the key things I would like leaders to think about is valuing and respecting the input of young people instead of this top-down approach of,
Mm,
they're too young to know anything or
right,
they're too young to provide value.
right, absolutely. Sydney, what about you? What's something you wish leaders knew about young people today?
Well, this is going to be a little bit boring because it's very similar to Imogen's response, but that's really something that is important at Mentor Canada as well. And I mentioned it before around how mentorship relationships are reciprocal. So, I mentioned that we often think of mentorship as intergenerational. So, an older person who's kind of sharing their experience with a younger person, which definitely is still valuable, but similar to what Imogen said, is that a lot of young people are already leading. So if it's not necessarily that they need to learn how to lead, but they might need access to networks, or they might need access to connections, or they could even teach people of older generations how they can navigate certain barriers and things like that. So what's really important is exactly what we mentioned before, is that young people are experts in their own lived experience. They're experts in plenty of things that people may not know who are generations older than them. And so really valuing and understanding that knowledge and seeding that power in order for young people to really step into that space is really important for people to know, leaders of all ages to know. And I mentioned that specifically around the role of a mentor. So I think often you can think of this as a top-down type of relationship, but that actually means you're not doing mentorship well. It means that you're not stepping aside and really allowing the young person to guide their conversation, guide how you support them. And the most important thing is, how are you helping young people to potentially build skills? How to navigate barriers that were built up intentionally to exclude them from places of leadership. So really, you're more of an ally than dictating how things should go. And I think that that's really the best way to engage young people and foster their existing leadership, or even grow the leadership of people who haven't seen themselves as leaders, despite the fact that they are creating change in their communities.
Right. I like to say, especially here and now, every generation has something to learn and something to teach. And maybe that hasn't happened in the hierarchical past, but that's something really to treasure and leverage today, I think. Um, all right, so you agreed that youth are powerful, they need to be heard. Now I'm curious to know, based on your experiences, your observations working with young people, how do you think young people are going to change the world? How are they going to influence change and influence our collective futures? What do you predict is going to be happening in, 5 to 10 years from now that's different as a result of young people's influence? So, Sydney, you can start us off this time.
Great. This is a fantastic question. And of course, this will look different for different young people, or potentially in different areas, because there is, so much diversity in the spaces that young people are leading. But I do, in the typical Mentor Canada fashion, want to ground this in a little bit of research. So we have released a research report called Unlocking Doors, and it focuses on racialized youth. So Black, Indigenous, and youth of color, and how they're accessing spaces of employment. And one of the things that came out of this is that their definition of success, youth are defining success as more than something that's status oriented or title oriented. It's really more values oriented. So it's something that's focused on, of course, financial stability could be important, and that may come with job title and status, but other things are important as well. They identified mental health and well-being as being a huge priority, supportive relationships instead of extractive relationships. Autonomy was also something that they identified, and really importantly was community care, or contributing to a community. So young people actually identified this as things that are really important for them. So it kind of shows that in the future, we'll see leadership norms potentially shift to match those values, right? So less hierarchical, less status oriented, but really more focused on this more holistic approach. So talking about mental health and well-being in a workplace, for example, thinking about work-life balance, understanding how community care can help us when we're creating this change or breaking down those structural barriers. So I think that that's something that's really interesting that we're seeing from our research, that young people are transforming when it comes to the next 5 to 10 years and their influence. And I also think another part of it is that when we think about mentorship, youth are saying that this isn't really a nice to have type of thing. It really is something that helps to improve outcomes in a really impactful way. So For example, 73% of the youth that we have surveyed in this work said that their mentor helped to improve their self confidence, for example.
Wow.
So it was really something that was important. Possibly
Yeah.
more importantly, especially like now, is that 83% of youth who had a formal mentor indicated that they had a stronger sense of belonging compared to youth
Mm.
who didn't have mentorship or only had informal mentorship. So we're kind of seeing the way that youth are really looking to other leaders, whether it's their peers or people who are older than them, to really determine what the next stage of leadership looks like. And it's a lot more relational, it's a lot more community grounded, it's a lot more values based. So we're not just feeling it, it's actually showing up in our research as well. And I think that that's kind of how young people are shaping what things are going to look like in 5 to 10 years.
Right. And it's so interesting because there's so much conversation right now about AI and that, oh, we're going to, really rely on technology and things like that. But I think it's really hopeful to think about, well, this could potentially really spur community building, relationships, belonging, and it could actually be a really good thing, right? Well, it'll free us up,
Exactly.
yeah, to think about some of these things differently. Imogen, I'm curious about your viewpoints. Do you agree with what Sydney says? Are you seeing new and different trends? How do you think youth are going to influence the future?
Yeah, just anecdotally, I would definitely agree with what Sydney has said. We've seen that here as well in Australia. I think actually Canada and Australia are quite similar in a lot of aspects, and that's another one. Um, just to build upon another idea, I suppose, is at least here, speaking to this context. I think a lot of the young people now, and definitely heading into the next decade, will be influencing politics and policy.
Mm,
Essentially, they're going to change how change is made. Um, we can see that already with a particular movement here in Australia called the Duty of Care Bill, which is all being led by young people. And it actually started with litigation, and now it's into the more advocacy, policy
wow.
space, where young people were suing the government for not making policy with the duty of care of future generations in mind. That was being pushed by high schoolers. And it went through the court system with quite an interesting outcome. And now they've sort of switched tactics and now they're going through state governments. And so I think we will hopefully see a great outcome in the next decade of perhaps in parliament, in legislation, a duty of care to future generations, which is young people securing the rights of future young people, which is already going to change how policy is made. We can already see as well with how young people are engaging with politics that they want something fresh, they want something new, and they're tired of the status quo and they don't think it serves them. And more importantly, it doesn't serve others who are not heard. So young people often aren't just thinking about themselves, they can also see perhaps disempowerment in other communities and they're speaking up for that, which is really lovely. And hopefully we see a lot of traction because now they're going to outnumber the baby boomers in terms of voting. So
Yeah.
millennials and Gen Z are now the biggest voting bloc as we head into various elections in
Right.
Australia. So that's an exciting shift already. So
Mhm.
imagine where it's going to go. And just lastly, I would say in terms of things like climate change, which is specifically where I work in, we've already seen a youth-led movement that has achieved a lot in terms of structural change in government. So Australia is president of the negotiations this year at COP31 in Turkey. Um, and that means a young person is in that role, a young Australian is in the role of PYCC, which is representing youth voices at the climate negotiations this year. So that's an exciting push. There's various youth advisory councils in the federal government. So we've already seen all these sort of bodies adopt formal mechanisms to have youth voice included, and that's been pushed by youth. So that's what's already
Yeah.
happened. So imagine where we're going. So
Right.
especially around climate change, mental health, and I think workplace culture are probably some of the key areas I think young
Hmm.
people will shape.
Hmm. And that is inspirational, right? It's great. What's your advice to these leaders that may be really struggling to reach young people? Imogen?
Yeah, not only that whole values piece of in terms of valuing them as experts, but to build onto other points, we have to stop asking young people to conform to the current system and then expecting them to engage with that in the way we expect on our terms, right?
Mhm.
So if you're the government wanting youth perspectives, are you going to set the consultation at 10:30 a.m. because it suits you? They're in work, they're at school. Do they even have access to participate in that? Is it only held in our capital, which is miles away from everyone else? So there's all those structural barriers which instantly make this difficult. And then there's other barriers such as jargon and expecting them to have a to play along with the workplace etiquette that perhaps a public servant might have to adhere to. When you're asking young people for their thoughts and opinions, treating them as just a tick box exercise that's going to conform to the way you need to do your consultation isn't going to work. And I think one of the key points of that, therefore, is you actually have to let young people co-design the process. So you've got to bring them on board, you've got to get their design into the very consultation method itself, and that's how you will find more young voices that you haven't heard before, but also you're going to get more authentic responses. Because if imagine, I mean, it really is as simple as put yourself in the shoes of a 16-year-old, for example. And if you want their genuine thoughts on the healthcare system, say the mental health care support system, how are you going to get the best outputs from them in a way that they feel like they've genuinely been heard and they've been sort of an equal partner in this process? Are you going to have it during school hours in a big boardroom in a city? That's not going to make any sense. There's so many structural barriers to participating. And also, that's really scary to sit maybe in a boardroom environment and to tell
Right.
perceived decision makers what you think isn't working well. You're not going to get those good responses. You're going to have sort of tainted data, essentially. So we specifically have worked with youth-led orgs that help us get into those communities. So it's young people organizing the consultations themselves, designing it with our help. We give them resources, and the outputs we're getting are so much more honest and real. And then, of course, just to tack on to that, it also matters that they are genuinely implemented, they're heard, and it's all reported back as well, so they feel like an equal partner. So you've just
Right.
got to really go from start to finish, thinking of all the steps in that process.
Yeah. Sydney, do you relate to what Imogen is saying? Do you have other ideas, advice for leaders who might be saying it's really difficult to engage young people?
This is a really good question. I have a personal example that aligns a little bit more with what Imogen was saying, and then I'll also share an example from Mentor Canada and some of the things that we're doing. But I remember, I think it was a while ago now, but I was probably in my mid-20s, and I was nominated by my organization to attend something called the Interparliamentary Union's conference for young parliamentarians. It was hosted in Ottawa in Canada. It was exciting for Canada to be hosting this event. And their definition of youth in that forum was 45 and under. So what most people would not really consider a young person. I know that the United Nations has a few different definitions. Sometimes it's under 25, sometimes it's under 30, sometimes under 35. My personal opinion is that 45 is pushing it a little bit to be calling those folks young, right? But it just kind of spoke to the fact that if they did have an actual measure of youth that was closer to some of those other benchmarks, they wouldn't have enough parliamentarians to be able to join the conference. That's why they had to put it to 45, right? Because if there's so few that are under 30 or under even 35, that means that you can't really have a meaningful dialogue. So it just kind of showed me that even though I was kind of what I would consider more on the older end of youth, that I was actually one of the youngest people in the room. And I wasn't even a parliamentarian, I was an observer. So it really spoke to what Imogen is saying around we don't really give a lot of decision-making power to young people. And we don't necessarily have to say, like, let's scrap everyone's leadership position and put a 19-year-old in there, but maybe have one or a few who are able to really share that power with other people. And so I think our institutions need to really consider that. How are we hiring young people in our organizations? How are we creating space for leadership in other decision-making apparatus? I think that's really important, especially because we know that there's bias, right? So a lot of people will hire or promote or advocate for people who are like them. And so if we continue to exclude young people, that means that that cycle will continue, right? So we really want to make sure that we're creating that space. And then speaking from Mentor Canada's side of things, I talked about this a bit before, but this values piece is something we're really focused on. both from how we're building capacity for the mentorship space, but also in the research that we're doing. And so we're really looking at what are the values that drive young people to access mentorship, and what are the values in a mentor that they look for. And so we're trying to really understand how can we approach young people from a values perspective instead of from what are the skills that they can offer, things like that, which are very important as well. But it's important not to forget the values element, because we know from the research that younger generations prioritize this potentially more than older generations do. And I think what it really helps us to do is avoid what we call deficit-based language for young people. So instead of focusing on what young people are lacking, we're focusing on their strengths and what they can build. And so that's a really important way when you're, working with young people or trying to attract more young people. Don't think about it as, oh, I need to help them fill this gap. Think of it as they have these incredible strengths and skills. How am I going to help them to grow that? And you're going to see that's going to foster growth mindset in the young people that you're working with, but it's also going to make a more open and accepting place for young people.
Right. And I think that deficit-based language, it pops up often. And it's often, I hear it as an excuse among leaders that, oh, they're just really difficult, or we've tried everything, nothing works. And yes, changing the viewpoints, changing the language is key. So my last question for each of you is simply, why the next gen? Why now? So who'd like to go first in our closing comments?
I can jump in. I feel like Sydney will have a really great finishing remark. I've loved listening to everything you've said so far and wholeheartedly agree. Um, just simply, all I have written down in my notes is if you focus on youth, you focus on the future.
Mm,
This is a very exciting generations coming up. They've never been more educated, more potential to realize their potential. So
mm,
imagine what we could unlock if we really actively work with them to help them achieve their potential and build the world they want to see. I think when you talk to young people with about their vision for the future, the hope they have for the future, it's always holding us to a better standard than we currently are. And that is the kind of future I want to invest in. So I want to invest in the young people who are going to build that. So I'll butcher the phrase, but it's the concept of you plant the seed for the tree in which shade you'll never sit under. And that's exactly sort of the theory that I have, at least in my work. It will create a better world, not just for young people, but for everyone. And it'll keep policy forward thinking. So yeah, let's do it.
yes, nice job. Sydney.
I love that. And first of all, thank you so much, Imogen, for saying that. I've also really enjoyed this conversation, and I feel like it's been really motivating and inspirational. And that's actually kind of what I want to end this discussion on. I know that stats are not always inspirational, but we actually have some really cool ones for why it's really important to focus on young people now. But investing in youth actually has really important outcomes for all of us, like Imogen said. So when we think about mentoring, one of the big ones is that mentored youth are twice as likely to mentor others in the future. So when you're investing in young people now, that cycle, that reciprocity, that idea of paying it forward is embedded from when they're a young person, and they're helping the next generation. So that's really important. We all probably got help from someone at some point, someone who may have been older than us. And so we need to inspire that as well for future generations, and they can define it in the way that makes sense for them. And then another part, and Sarah, you mentioned this early on, is hope. It's a really rough time right now, and it's really hard to feel hopeful about things. And I know everyone feels it. Young people probably feeling it even more so because they have to live with a lot of these consequences for longer than older generations will have to. 70% of mentored youth that we surveyed said that their mentor influenced their hope and optimism for the future. And so we really need to, like you said, move away from some of those technological solutions and get back to connecting as people, because I don't know, but I don't think AI is going to do as good of a job of inspiring hope and optimism the way that connection is going to. And so that's why it's really important that we focus on the next generation now, and that we create those spaces for connection between generations.
Love it. Wow. Both of you gave me so much to think about. So I know our audience is going to be like, whew, right? You're very inspiring. Thank you for all you're doing to advocate for your younger generations and prioritize the next gen now. Welcome to the summit, Lennon and Marie. Very excited to have this conversation with you both about some of the trends in technology and how they're affecting the next generation. Would each of you just take a moment to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about the organizations you represent? So, Lennon, I'll have you go first.
Well, hello. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Lennon Torres. I use she, her pronouns, and I grew up on, predatory social media platforms, and that lived experience has really given me a personal connection to the work that I do at Heat Initiative, which is a nonprofit that brings corporate campaigning, similar to the structure that we've seen go against big industry in the past, like big tobacco, the environmental industry, big oil. So we've really taken what we've learned from past social movements, and I like to say that we are in the business of creating the cultural conditions for change. And so there I am working on campaigns, events, protests, storytelling, and a lot of what I do is very survivor centered. And I have a real deep honor of being able to work with a bunch of those. So excited to bring all of that to this conversation today.
Fantastic. Thank you for joining us, Lennon. And you're based in California, in LA, or where? Yes, LA.
Yeah,
All right.
shiny LA.
Yes. And now we're going to cross the globe over to Marie. So, Marie, would you introduce yourself, please?
Sure, thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure. So, my name is Marie Potel. I'm the co-founder of Fair Patterns, which we like to call the antivirus for humans. So, basically, it's a multimodal AI that scans everything that's live to detect dark patterns and addictive design, which I now call predatory design. So I love, how you introduced yourself, Lennon, growing up in this predatory environment. This is actually
Mhm.
what I now consider predatory design. My background is in law. I was a lawyer for 10 years in big law. Around Europe and Mexico City. And then I moved in-house. I was a GC for a couple of years, and I've been what I like to call a human-centric entrepreneur for the past 8 years already. So this is
Wow.
me. Thanks.
Yes. All right, fantastic. And Marie is based in Paris. So,
That's right.
two amazing cities. Yes. All right, so let's dive in. Why? Let's talk about social media first. Why is social media, as well as other technologies, but why are these at the forefront right now of people's hearts and minds, especially regarding the protection of young people? There's a lot happening in these landscapes. So, Marie, I'll start with you this time.
Okay, sure. Well, I think, why is simply that we now have access to internal documents from Meta and YouTube, for example, but also even from TikTok, showing what these companies have known for years, which is basically that they've been engineering compulsions, especially within children, so
Mhm.
pre-adolescents and teenagers, knowingly. And we now have all these internal evidence that were actually found through discovery in a number of cases that I guess we'll be talking about, including the Meta YouTube verdict. And having those documents out there publicly available now for the first time, I think really changes everything. Because when you see how, predatory their behavior has been, knowing exactly that, for example, Instagram was addictive, probably still is addictive, knowing exactly the addict narratives that the teenagers they interviewed were explaining, and still, deciding not to do anything about it tells it
Yeah,
all, right?
right, right. All right, Lennon, what do you have to add to that?
I think Marie, you hit it right on the nose. I think what because of the internal documents and yes anding what you had to say is that we are now at a point where it's becoming a kitchen table issue, which
Mhm.
is something that we say here in the United States, meaning that it is something that families are experiencing the turmoil personally, and it's things that they are starting to connect to the other problems that they're facing, whether it be income inequality or childcare or you know, just basic human rights, it can all be sort of drawn back to this, engagement model or incentive structure that was built so carefully and built with such intention from the executives to do exactly what Marie was saying. And as someone who knows a lot of the young people who have lost their lives to these harms, and we were just in DC last Tuesday with all the parents and some young advocates who have been impacted by this design, and we held a vigil on Capitol Hill. There was over 70 parents there from across the globe. We had UK parents as well, and it really sort of brings the scale right in front of your face. And so I think that what's happening is people are, for lack of a better term, waking up because they're actually feeling the downstream of effects that really do happen when an industry is making calculated decisions about the design of their products to addict young people.
Right. So how is this going to change everything, right? We're there's a lot of conversation about social media bans all over the globe, and it's literally happened within months, right? It's spreading like wildfire. As you mentioned, it says if people are all of a sudden waking up. But how will these social media bans likely influence other changes? What are you predicting is going to occur? Start with you, Lennon, this time.
Yeah, I think there's a number of legislative solutions out there that are being piloted by a lot of really bold lawmakers and leaders in the world. And so for me personally, I really admire the guts of Australia and the E-Safety
Mm,
Commission to, try something bold like a ban and see what happens and to sort of, you know, put a band-aid, I think, on what's really a bleeding wound here is we have to do something. What I've been saying is that kids are being harmed, marginalized communities are being harmed at exponential scale online. And because of that, we have to do something. And I view, removing young people from these platforms as a band-aid, as an option to do right now. But I long term really like to see, more design specific legislation that's focused on, how we build and create an environment of innovation for safe platforms and leave room for young people, especially to innovate and create the digital communities that they want to see. And so I
mhm.
think it's a double-edged sword where, obviously no one wants young people on Instagram right now, but also banning all social media can feel um, impossible and daunting for a young person to get on board with.
Right, right. What are your thoughts on this, Marie? What's this gonna spur?
So, yes, I agree with Lennon that it takes a lot of courage to ban social media. So Australia did it, France did it, Turkey is doing
Mm,
it. I mean, there are plenty
yeah,
of countries around the globe, and that's, very understandable given the harms and the scale of the harms. Now, as a human-centric AI entrepreneur, I tend to have an issue with outright ban. First,
mm,
because it's unfair, you know,
mm,
um, it's like excluding people, and of course we need to protect them, but it's like we're creating something and then they can't be a part of it. And the promise of technological progress is that, all humans can benefit from it. So to me, it's a bit unfair, and also it's inefficient because, as probably teenagers' brains are wired to take more risks. It's really
Yeah.
part of adolescence. You want to try new things, you want to explore, and the more it's prohibited, the more you want to try. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it's been really evidenced medically, even from a neuroscience standpoint. And we all know how easy it is to circumvent those bans, right? You use a VPN. Not that I want to encourage it, but I mean it's fairly easy to circumvent. So what we would like to see is responsible innovation, responsible progress, which
Yeah.
means that basically companies need to evidence that whatever designs and notifications and architecture is on their platforms, well, it's not harming humans, especially not harming kids and teenagers, and then everybody can enjoy it.
Yep.
So what I would love to see is a precautionary scan, independent third-party scan of all of these platforms even before they can go live, to ensure
Mm.
the entire absence of addictive design, the entire absence of dark patterns, online manipulation, and then everybody can enjoy it safely, and also parents can, be relieved of a burden that really shouldn't be on their shoulders. Currently,
Mm.
it's like creating racing cars with no brakes and telling kids and teens, don't go too fast. So,
Yeah.
Right.
yeah, I really
Mm.
hope that we can see this preemptive security, really human safety scan, so that then everybody can enjoy social media, because that's also important.
Yes,
Right.
and I really love that, like everything that you said, I'm totally on board with. And I think that what is really important about what you said a few times is that the onus goes back on the company, and the person that's
Mm.
profiting off of putting this platform out into the world is responsible for creating like an age appropriate experience. And so we in the United States have some legislation called the Age Appropriate Design Code. And so that's really where my, you know, passion is, and what I think is the strongest legislative solution right now over a social media ban, for all of the reasons that you had said.
Right. Interesting. So our audience is largely going to be employers, industry leaders. So if obviously this is impacting youth, how does this impact business? How, what do they need to know? How does this impact the future workforce? Some of these trends, why should they be paying attention, essentially? So, Lennon, you want to start this time?
Yeah, I think so. My colleague and business partner, Ava Smithing, we founded a firm called the Attention Studio. It's separate from my work at Heat Initiative, but what she often says is that any problem that you're currently having, you could probably stem it back to something that big tech perpetuated and or created itself. And
Mm.
so I think that when you are looking at leaders in the space, whether they're, in the entertainment industry or in the STEM industry, or, are building products for transportation, whatever it may be, what we're experiencing right now is the concentration of wealth and power at a scale that is incredibly dangerous. And I think especially here in the United States, seeing, figures like Mark Zuckerberg and Tim Cook, buddy up with Trump at the inauguration, and to see this sort of oligarchan, energy, it's becoming an issue. And this is really what I mean when I say kitchen table. It's impacting everyone, whether it's a parent whose child has, attention fragmentation and can't sleep at night, or is it the workforce that, folks are taking long and really insanely long breaks because they're addicted to scrolling on their devices in the bathroom? Is it, and my mention in bringing all these things up isn't to blame the user. Again, it's to really highlight the things that have shifted in our society by carefully thought out decisions and manipulation tactics, and it really is predatory. And I believe that a lot of the technology that is being created is done so in this predatory manner in a way that exploits the vulnerabilities of a lot of people, including leaders, including young people, including people who are in the workforce, parents, grandparents. Like, it's really impacting everyone in some sort of way. And I think that that is really what is shining through right now.
Interesting. Marie, what do you think? Why is this important for leaders to know about and employers?
I believe there are at least two reasons why industry leaders should really care. The first one is their own workforce. We have evidence that currently the compulsion is engineered, it's completely architectured. And we have evidence that, of course, it works even better on kids and teens, but it also works on adults. The
Right.
dopamine
Yeah.
loops, it
Yeah.
works on all humans, basically,
Hmm.
because basically, let's take a moment to explain this. The human brain is very sensitive to dopamine shots. And so it's true for adults as well. We react very positively to, rewards that are unexpected. So any notification, number of likes, any pop-up, something
Hmm.
that we didn't expect and that sort that, even in a fake way rewards us, then we get this dopamine shot. And dopamine is really addictive for all humans, which means that the current workforce is also affected. And I believe that, all of us have experienced some form
Yeah.
of addiction, compulsion, something unhealthy on social media. Typically, I had to download an app to keep me away from LinkedIn during my holidays and during my weekend. So it's blocked.
Mm. Hmm. Hmm.
And I'm working in this AI
Yeah.
environment.
Right.
So
Right.
I think industry leaders should really take care about their workforce because it means fragmented attention. It means that it's harder to focus in for deep work.
Hmm.
It's also anxiety raising for all of us, including adults, and it's potentially mental health issues and going on leave. And currently, the employers are bearing that cost. Whereas, probably they shouldn't. The second
Mm.
reason I see is legal exposure. Let's talk about that just for a second. Dark patterns, which are basically online manipulation, are completely illegal around the world. So you've got tons of legal basis in the US, starting with Section 5 of the FTC Act. There's also specific legislation in California, uh, and it's being prosecuted as we speak. Okay. We've got similar legislation in the EU. So, legal exposure on dark patterns specifically, but also at addictive design. Now that we have this verdict on Meta and YouTube officially recognizing them both being guilty of addictive design, and we know that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of very similar cases pending in the US and in the EU, I think that's also a reason for industry leaders to care.
Right. Right. This makes me wonder a little bit about AI because we're quickly moving into this world of AI, and and if that's going to also become almost how that's going to influence human behavior and human mind and all of that. Um, let's talk about community building because obviously young people have used social media, yes, for fun, but also for connectivity through gaming, through social networks. they've met networks. There's been a positive side to that. How does this change communication peer to peer? Does it change communication? Does it change community building? Again, some of this is predictions at this point, possibly, but curious to hear your viewpoints on that. How will young people build community in the absence of some of this technology? Or will the technology continue? Just curious. Marie.
So, about technology first, we have evidence for the past year or so by AI safety researchers that all the main LLMs all include AI dark patterns, so a form of manipulation inside the LLMs themselves. So obviously, anything that derives from these LLMs will also display, some
Mm-hmm.
manipulative features.
Mm-hmm.
So, inevitably, that will also translate in social media. Now, what we hope to see is a future where young people are empowered to create the kind of peer-to-peer interaction and therefore the kind of social media that they want to see where they have agency. Let me give you a very simple example. There was an experiment which was ran on social media by the Dutch consumer protection regulator. They did that experiment on a fairly large number of teenagers in this country, and they did a very small intervention one of which was just to let teenagers decide before going on a given social media how much time they intended to spend there, like a conscious
Mm-hmm.
decision, like I want to know what my friends are doing or,
Mm-hmm.
whatever, and I decide that I'm going to spend X. And there were a number of other very simple interventions. This experiment alone resulted in 30% less time spent on social media without diminishing the satisfaction of users. And that's the most important. Users,
Yeah.
teenagers were still as happy to use, probably even happier, while spending less time. This is a very interesting experiment, right? So I would really encourage any design where teenagers in particular and young adults are empowered to decide by themselves, to have agency over their design features that they want to see.
Right. Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Lennon, I was going to say, thoughts on that? I know
Yeah.
this is a topic near and dear to your heart. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, so much of what you said I agree with, and what sticks out to me is the emphasis on consumer rights, but also just consumer protection and what they want and what they're hoping to get out of a product. I think what we have lost sight of, unfortunately, is that these are products that are optional and that they're opt in, not opt out. And I think a lot of what has happened in our culture due to this predatory design is that these products feel embedded and sewn into the fabrics of our everyday lives when they don't necessarily even have to. I also think that they've taken something like engagement and told people that that's what community feels like, and that, reach and followers is visibility. And
Mm-hmm.
as a young LGBTQ plus person on these platforms, I firsthand experienced, much higher rates of harm on these platforms than my peers did. And, I would hear from folks, well, young queer people absolutely need social media. And I don't necessarily disagree, but what I disagree with is that Instagram, Twitter, or X are social media. I think that they're really bad excuses of social media, and that these platforms were built with one thing in mind, and that's money and in maximizing engagement versus, actually creating community. And I'm particularly interested in looking at technology as a facilitator of third spaces. Marie, you're in Paris, and one of my favorite things about Paris is the lively third spaces that exist, and the parks, and the just the culture is so different, at least back a couple years ago when I would visit. And And that's what we're missing. And young people don't have access to third spaces because our third space has become scrolling. And
Mm,
I really want to envision a world where technology is a tool and is something that young people use to facilitate meaningful in-person and online connection that is something they're seeking out, and it's not something that's happening to them or something that is pre-engineered for a certain reaction or behavior. And that's why I really believe in, leading the way and moving, as much of this, garbage narrative that, Instagram is social media, and just being honest with folks that this is the worst possible iteration of it, and we could do so much better and, demand more from the products that we're using and consuming every day. Same reason you'd buy, really nice baby food for your baby. We want really nice, pristine social media. And right now we have the like canister that was like opened in the back and that like ants gone in.
yeah,
That's what we're
right.
working with right now, is just a really lazy version of what social media could be because it makes very few people a lot of money.
Right. This is a topic that I feel we could talk about for hours. I am absolutely fascinated by this, but our time is limited, and I appreciate you being part of this summit. We're focusing on prioritizing the next generation, as well as talking about some of the trends and just bringing awareness to youth initiatives. My final question to each of you is, why focus on this? Why focus on the next gen now? Lennon?
Because we have to. I feel in this work, I don't feel like it's an option anymore. I think we are in the crux of it, and we get to decide at this point, given the cultural conditions that we've created with the trials. And I was at the courthouse nearly every day at the social media addiction trials and worked really
Mhm.
closely with the attorneys of record. And you know and that to me is a signal that it's no longer an option, but it's happening. And so you kind of have to get on board. So to me it feels less like something that we should focus on and feels like something that we have to focus on if we want to see a world that's not going to be what Mark Zuckerberg envisions. And to me, I certainly don't want to live in his world. And so I will do everything I can to make sure that, we're building a world that young people actually want and feel excited about.
Thank you, Lennon. And Marie, why the next gen now?
Well, it's a no-brainer, really. This is probably the first generation which will have entirely grown up in algorithmic feeds
Mhm.
with, again, compulsion being engineered. By the way, the word, addictive design is a bit misleading because it implies that it's a bit the fault of the user, oh, you're an addict. No, 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 you're the victim of engineered compulsion, which is very, very different. And so, anyway, this is the first generation which will have grown up entirely in this, those algorithmic bubbles and within environments that engineer compulsion and raise anxiety. We don't have the entire set of data totally, but the first, the first sets of data that we have are really scary. So let's not wait until we have more
Yeah,
critical data to act. The
right.
second reason to focus on the new generation is also that the way Gen AI works, and LLMs in particular, means that everything we do now is sort of setting in stone and probably engineering more harm in the future if we don't fix it now. because of the probabilistic nature of LLMs. So this is our chance. This is now. We don't have 40 years like in the fight against the tobacco industry. It took 40 years to have minimal results. We don't have that time. So yeah, the time is now to ensure that we protect this generation and we empower them to build the digital environment that they want for themselves to feel safe and included and happy.
Well, Len and Emery, thank you for being part of the summit. Your voices, your messages are very important.
What are young people in Australia thinking and feeling?
We're the youth of Australia, and this is what we have to say.
We've seen the cracks in the system.
We've spoken.
Now we want Australia to listen.
And we are speaking now.
I'm Tatara, and I'm honoured to be Australia's Youth Representative to the United Nations for 2025. Over the past year, I've been able to travel around Australia's 7.7 million square kilometres, and I've heard over 5,000 people in Australia, in schools, in correctional facilities, remote communities, refugee centres, classrooms, and communities out on country. And I've heard you. Young people are voicing their concerns about youth justice, climate, healthcare, infrastructure, education, and so much more. As I'm currently in New York about to take your voices to the UN, I feel inspired, passionate, as I feel the weight of thousands of your voices, as I go to echo them to the world. Each and every one of you has made an impact not just on me, but on Australia and the international community. You've challenged me and taught me of the power we hold when we come together to create change. And now I'm so proud to present the 2025 report, Australian Voices to the World. This takes a deep dive into the issues which matter to young Australians the most, spotlighting key initiatives, organisations and recommendations to make the landscape of Australia much more equitable and just for youth in our country. As my term comes to a close, I want to thank you, the young people, volunteers, youth workers, teachers, elders, decision makers, DFAT, my team, and everyone I've had the privilege of spending an entire year with. Whilst my time as youth rep is ending, the work, the fight, and the vision for a better future continues, and so will I. So thank you for trusting me with your voices. Thank you to everyone who believed in this.
We still need.
Up next, we have the producer of Dear Prime Minister from Australia, and I'm so excited to learn a little bit more about this. Could you start by introducing yourself to our audience?
Absolutely. So my name is Sarah Sladek, and I'm 23 years old, and I work as a youth and human rights advocate in Australia, based out of Canberra, which is, our capital. But yes, I'm very passionate about human rights, particularly as they pertain to vulnerable groups within Australia. And have been doing a bit of work in that field over the last couple of years.
Amazing. Okay. So you went on a listening tour, right? And you collected youth letters, and that ended up in a documentary. So tell us about this project and why you did it.
For sure. So basically last year, I was very lucky to be appointed Australia's Youth Ambassador to the United Nations. And that's a role that's supported by our Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And basically what it looks like is every year a young person around Australia is selected to go around the country and get a sense of what it's like to be a young person. And I was very, very fortunate to be able to travel around Australia, all 7.7 million square kilometres of it, from the bottom, Tasmania, up to the Tiwi Islands in the top end of the country, just talking to young people from very different backgrounds about what their lives were like and what they wanted to see more of. And so I went on this tour, and while I was going on it, I kind of realized I wanted to collect handwritten letters to the Prime Minister, because I thought, why be the vessel of communication myself? Why can't I just take the words directly from young people in very remote parts of the country all the way to the capital? And so I ended up collecting these letters, and they painted this really beautiful tapestry of modern Australia, what it was to be Australian. And it was such a privilege to be able to deliver those to the kind of highest places of leadership. So at the second part of the year, I had the opportunity to go to New York, to the United Nations, and give an address to the General Assembly, as well as to COP30 in Brazil as well. So it was a really lovely opportunity and just such an honor, and one I'll never forget.
That is absolutely amazing. So how many letters?
So I collected kind of just over 1,000, which was really, really amazing. And there's such a wide variety of them. I think some people write just one word sentences. I think once I got a letter which said, "Dear Prime Minister, I hope to see you tomorrow." And sometimes they're really lovely and long and eloquent, and sometimes they're images like pictures from young children. And so they vary a lot, but they're all just so beautiful.
That's amazing. Okay, so what surprised you about what you learned from this experience?
I think what surprised me was how diverse the Australian experience is. And I think I knew some of this going into the role. Like I grew up as a young carer for my younger sister. And so I always knew that people in Australia that communicate differently often get left behind. But I think particularly going into places like Central Australia, where I was talking to young First Nations people who were living in kind of town camps or in really extreme poverty situations, I'm getting a sense of the fact that we all live in this one nation, but have very different conditions and lives to each other. And I think it's really important we have that awareness. The other thing that I think really surprised me was one of the things I wanted to do on my tour was actually go into the places that we don't hear from, and that was youth detention spaces. So going into kids as young as 10 who had been locked up, and getting a sense really of how our criminal justice system treats our most vulnerable. So I think that was another one that really shocked me because I hadn't had experience with that. I don't think many Australians would say they've spoken to someone who's been incarcerated, let alone a child. And so that was something that really took me back, but also was such an interesting and breathtaking experience.
And how amazing for you to have given them a voice, right?
Oh, I think, I mean, it was really my pleasure to do it. And they're just so articulate and they have so much to say. And it really, I think I really wish more people could give that platform to them, because I think if they did, we'd have all the solutions to all the issues that we need to fix.
Right. Okay, so you took all this information and it ended up in a televised documentary, Dear Prime Minister. What has the response been to this show, this effort?
Yeah, it's been amazing. Because I've never really put something out of this scale before. And so after the documentary aired, people could view it from across the world. And so I was getting all these beautiful responses from people all over the place, saying that they felt seen and heard, and that they had worked with people in detention or worked with young kids with disabilities or worked with First Nations kids, and had very much empathized with what they were seeing in the documentary. I heard from young people who said that they were really blown away by the kind of, the visibility that they were given. I think some of those young kids that were included in the documentary hadn't ever had a voice before, let alone a public one. And so they were saying that really gave them confidence to do more, which I was really happy about. But ultimately, I think I kind of said earlier in the interview that one thing that shocked me was how diverse Australia is. But I think also one thing that kind of shocked me post-documentary was how united we are as well, and how many people want to see better things for young people in the future. And so getting calls from around the world saying, look, I empathize with this, I think I see this in my community, how can I help, was just such an uplifting experience, and I'm glad it was able to reach so many people.
Yeah, amazing. So it really inspired and potentially motivated. I'm curious what your advice is to other young people who, want to share their voice or do something to create meaningful change. They're not sure where to start. What would your advice be?
Absolutely. I would say just go for it. I think one thing I often think about when I was younger is what advice I'd what would have made it easier for me to do what I want to do. And that's go for it, and also be true to yourself and be true to your own leadership style. I think often we're told there's this one way to lead, or there's this one way to do things. And I think that's just not true at all. If there's anything I've learned from traveling around Australia, talking to young girls in town camps or in detention centres or up in the far north in the Tiwi Islands, it's you can do things to your own beat. You can do things that are authentic to yourself, and that's how you lead and do things best. I think sometimes we're in a society that tries to keep us all in the same box, but really we need to be seeing more diversity of solutions, diversity of voices, and diversity of people at the leadership table. So really be true to yourself, and don't ever doubt that your diversity is your strength.
Amazing. On the opposite side of the spectrum, what's your advice to leaders who might want to mentor or support young people or make room for youth, and they're really not sure where to start with those efforts? What's your advice for them?
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting because as someone who kind of also was on the other side of it, so taking these young voices to places like the Parliament, I kind of got a sense of where that disconnect maybe was. And I think the thing I would say to leaders is like just listen. Sometimes I think you can feel the need to speak to young people, but not fully listen to what they have to say. So making those spaces at the table for them to be equals, for them to have that voice and for you to listen is really important, as their elected representatives as well. I think also going out and consulting as many young people as possible, like go to your electorates, sit down with young people who don't have the opportunity to travel to Parliament House, like reach out to people in very different areas of Australia or different areas of life, because their views are often really, really important to understand. I would also say, like sometimes in terms of mentoring, you'll be surprised by what you can learn from these young people as well. Like it's never really a one-way kind of thing. I think young people can learn so much from you and your experience, but just kind of go with an open mind and see what you can learn from these kids. Because I think one thing I learned was just how many things young people have in their minds and how many things they can share. And a lot of them already have the solutions to problems, which I think leaders have been deliberating on for years now. So just taking the time to listen and learn, but also treating them as equals as well.
Right. Did your project receive a response from the Prime Minister, from Parliament, from any key decision makers?
Yeah, so I was very lucky to be able to take the letters to Parliament, and particularly so I took them to the Governor General, who's kind of the King's representative here in Australia. So she was incredible in terms of receiving them and giving them the attention and platform that I wanted. And so being able to read the letters out, letters from kids in jail to someone like the Governor General was just an incredible moment, and one that will stay with me. I was also able to take them to the UN Secretary General in New York, which was great. And I think what was really cool about that was being able to take the voices of our patch in Australia, to the world stage and show the strength of Australian young people. And that was really awesome. And again, taking it to parliamentarians, taking it to former prime ministers and things like that. Unfortunately, we haven't received a response from the Prime Minister at the moment. It's still a work in progress, but
fingers crossed. Yeah.
Fingers crossed. I hope in the next couple of months or the next year we'll be able to get at least a small response and acknowledgement, because I think it would mean the world to these young people to have someone like the Prime Minister actually read those beautiful letters.
Absolutely. And this isn't the first time you've reached out to someone in leadership, if I'm not mistaken. I think I read something about you writing a letter to the Pope at one point, right?
Yes, that's true. I think my ambition to try and get to the top dogs started fairly young. When I was 10, I wrote to the Pope because at the time, I think it was quite a selfish reason. I really wanted to be Pope myself, and it wasn't really for any particular religious reason. I just really liked the idea of being in that role. But I think the biggest impediment that I noticed was that I was not a man. And I was like, why is it that women can't be the Pope? And so I wrote to the Pope and I asked, what?
Valid question. Yes.
I was like, why is that the case? Why is it that we can't have a female Pope? And unfortunately, I didn't receive a reply that time, but I rewrote the letter, I think a couple of years later. My friends kind of said, why don't you just give it another shot? And I did. And I did get a response, but it wasn't super satisfactory. It kind of just said, go to your local Catholic priest and have a chat about it. But I think still what that kind of taught me was just from a young age how much I saw these kind of inequalities at that leadership and global governance level. And I kind of wanted to ask myself, why is it that some of us are barred from that, but some aren't? And I think that just comes to the crux of the project and the work that I like to do in my life. It's making sure that we build those bridges between the most marginalized and the most vulnerable with the people that hold the power. So it was a very interesting exercise.
Yes. And I have to ask, do you feel that desire or that drive to hold leaders accountable is really something that is very important to your generation also?
Absolutely. I think reading these letters as well, you see how many people from across Australia hold the Prime Minister to account, and they say, look, I've had a there's just been a cyclone in my neighborhood only last week. Why aren't you doing anything about sending, more services? Or why aren't you doing anything about climate change? Or you've got another person from detention center saying, this happened to me in this detention center. Why are my rights not important? And so you've got these young people who are really strong in their voices, holding these leaders to account and saying, look, your job is to serve us. Like, you are our elected representatives. Don't forget about us, because we're really important too. And I really hope that part of the Letters Project means that leaders have to listen. Because I think sometimes, again, a lot of leaders and people in power get caught up in their own kind of power and where they are. And they don't realize that they're only there because of the people that elected them. And that includes the young people who deserve to be represented and deserve to have a voice. So I definitely think I see more of that fire in young people across the country and across the world as well. When I went to the UN, I was so blown away by how powerful youth voices from across the world were in kind of holding global leaders to account, particularly in a time of such turmoil as well. So I'm very hopeful the next generation will actually come forward with all the solutions and be able to lead as well. It's very exciting.
Yeah. So I'm curious, based on your experiences and your observations, where do you think innovation and change is most needed in our current business and governance models to successfully make room for the next generation?
Yeah, I think sometimes I think about this quite a lot, because businesses and governance models play such an important role in actually empowering grassroots communities. And I think sometimes they fail because they can be siloed or reactive and rely on short-term commitments. And I think maybe if we see innovation in more areas like funding structures, so shifting from competitive short-term grants to sustainable multi-year funding models would be really good, for example, as a first start. I talked to a lot of small businesses in remote regional parts of Australia who were saying we're constantly competing for these small grants that only last for about 1 or 2 years, but that's not enough for us to sustain the work that we do. So if we had bigger businesses kind of saying, okay, look, we'll invest in you, we'll support you for a long time, that can mean the world to a lot of those communities who do the best kind of work for those areas. I think also kind of, maybe this is a bit radical, but I think establishing co-design councils or places for youth advisory positions in businesses is really important. Like, I think having a young voice in the room to kind of make you aware of what's happening for young people, but also what the next generation want to see is actually really helpful and can be really useful in terms of how you plan for the future or what your kind of sustainability model looks like as well. And so, I really think that having that youth voice that's at the table, but also making sure that we shift from short-term to long-term generational thinking is one way that we actually kind of embody youth voices and youth perspectives more so in business and governance models.
Yes. Oh, you're speaking my language when you say that. I often advise organizations to really think about things like boards of directors and why is everyone, over 50? Let's diversify that. Let's get young voices, and not just one voice in the room, but several. It's, it leads to innovation. It leads to collaboration, community building, empathy. It's so important. It's so important.
Absolutely.
So, as being part of the Next Gen Now Summit, I have to ask, so Tara, why focus on the next gen now?
I think focus on the next generation now. We often hear that, we are the future. I think it's really important to realize that we are the present, that we're leading now, that we're not this problem to be thought about in the future, or what we talk about is not just about the future, but it's actually what's going on at the moment. I think Gen Z is such an interesting, diverse group of people that you can actually use to do things like find solutions to some of the big problems that we're facing, whether that be cost of living, climate change, education, poverty, all sorts of things. I think young people around the world are tired and we're wanting change and we want to see it. And I think the power of young people in being able to actually change the narrative going around in the world right now is really important. But again, I think it's kind of this thing of, even if people don't choose to focus on the next generation, I think the next generation are demanding to be heard anyway. So I don't think there's much escaping it if you wanted to anyway. But I think definitely this idea that young people are leading now in their communities and they're upholding some of the most brutal intersections of issues that we're seeing across the world. And so it's time to listen to them, to take them seriously, and treat them as equals at the table.
It's beautifully stated. All right, I'm very pleased to welcome two prominent educators to the show. Gentlemen, would you please introduce yourselves and tell our audience a little bit about your companies and what you do? Christopher, kick us off.
Thank you, Sarah. So great afternoon, everyone. My name is Christopher Williams. I'm the CEO and founder of STEM University. What our company does is create a connection between industry and education. We make that seamless. So we want to make sure scholars are exposed to STEM, but STEM in the eyes of what career opportunities are. So we want to make a true connection. And so that's what we do on the day to day. We try to make sure that Gen Alpha scholars understand STEM is a part of our everyday pathways. And so I'm thankful for being here today.
Fantastic. Go for it.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Lucian Jovic. I am an educator, I'm a researcher, and I also work as a representative to the United Nations for Kappa Delta Pi. So our organization works to represent educators across the entire United States and, of course, internationally. And we continue as a team to look for new and innovative pedagogical approaches to best meet the needs of students. And I'm very excited to be here today. So thank you, Sarah.
Yeah. I'm excited to dive into this. So, as prominent educators, obviously you're working with students. For a long time, we've heard so much about Generation Z, and now we're starting to hear a little bit about Gen Alpha, especially this year because the oldest alphas are starting to turn 16, which means they're starting to think about careers. And I am just curious to know, what are you observing? What are you learning about Generation Alpha? What can you tell our audience about this next gen that's going to be coming into the workforce?
So I guess I'll go first. What we've noticed in our space is that they're basically they're not native to technology. Technology is part of their everyday, and so they want to be immersed to it. What that means is they're not afraid of it. They want it to be a part of their everyday environment. Also, too, their attention is shorter. They want more engagement. They want to be immersed in what they're learning. They want to understand what is the purpose of what they're learning. They want to know that it has a meaning and a passion. So their choice and our decisions are very concise. They are intuitive, and at the same time, they're fearless. And that's the biggest thing about those scholars, that they understand what they want, and they'll tell you clearly if they don't want it, they're not going to do it. And so that is the biggest thing from a takeaway standpoint. And in our space, we want to make sure that they understand that they are the future of opportunity, and they can make that happen.
All right. Dr. Lucian, are you seeing different trends, same trends? What are you observing about this generation?
Yeah, more or less the same as what Chris just mentioned. We're also noticing that students enjoy conversing with one another. They're not afraid to speak up about the things that interest them and their opinions. I've noticed that a lot of students are more focused on inclusivity, diversity, making sure everyone feels kind of part of the team. And that same thing is seen even in the classrooms with students. They're enjoying this conversing with each other. And also we've noticed that even in writing assignments, students are really powerful with the words that they're using. They're being very strategic in the words that they're using. So it's nice to see that students are making sure everyone feels included, but are also proud of the statements that they're making and their opinions.
Well said.
It's so interesting how you're referring to Gen Alpha, both of you, because if I had to sum it up in one little phrase, it sounds like they're little adults. Like at a young age, they've really matured quickly. Would you say that's true?
100%.
Yeah, they sound very confident. Okay, so I tee that up because I think it's important for our audience today. They're tuning in, they want to know about the next generation, and they want to know who and what is coming next. And obviously, as educators, you're really close to that. And I'm curious to know, what do employers need to start
Mm.
thinking about when it comes to this next gen workforce? What kind of trends are you seeing, learning styles, but especially engagement experiences and expectations? We often hear from employers, well, we're really struggling to engage the younger generations, and that's been true for every generation that's come in. So, how can they start preparing for Gen Alpha? Dr. Lucian, you want to kick us off?
Sure. So I think a great way to prepare is really to kind of begin to focus on the concept of team and
Mm.
working collaboratively. I think a lot of times the Gen Alpha students really want to work together. They want to feel part of the team. They want to feel that their opinions and voices matter. So I think it's important to kind of give small leadership roles to those individuals because they feel like they can own something. They take something, they can run with it, and then you'll really see where students will go with this. So even in the classroom, I'm noticing that when you give a student a small task, give them a leadership role in a group, they own it and they're excited and proud to, complete that work. So I think that's a great way to start. I think it's also important in terms of vocational skills. So a lot of schools now are starting to move down the route of having vocational programs. And a lot of even countries are starting to do that, like Switzerland, like Germany, Singapore. So even schools here in the United States are starting to, and students are getting great skills. They are hands-on, they are ready, and just let the students dive in and see where they go.
Which is so incredibly
Yeah.
important. And I know Christopher has things to say about that as well. So, Christopher, what are you thinking in terms of what employers need to know?
Yeah, so I think what employers, from my perspective, what they need to know is that they don't need to have a lock and key on the careers. Meaning those careers need to be exposed to scholars now, those career assets. One of the things is going to probably lead to another question you're asking, Sarah, about platforms. We've created a platform called Career Builders. And what it does, it takes any career that's already in the industry, in the market, any future career, it puts that in the classroom in real time. So what
Mhm.
employers need to understand is that those now careers and those future careers need to be exposed to scholars because that's really the skills gap. It's about awareness, and those scholars, if they're not aware that a career exists, how can they ever want to apply for that career? How can they know what type of track to follow? And so the biggest thing I think employers need to know is that one, scholars need to be informed as early as possible. Two, they need to make sure they're building a culture for the new scholar that's coming into the environment because the culture has to make sense. It has to be an environment that they want to be a part of. If they cannot see themselves in that culture of the environment, the days of working 30 years on a job to wait for retirement are out the window. These
Mhm.
scholars are not going to do that, and they're not posed to do that. They would rather find something they're passionate about and do that versus doing something just to be able to pay a bill.
Right, right.
Well said.
What kinds of career interests are you observing with Gen Alpha, either of you?
Yeah, so mine's is going to be kind of swayed because I'm in STEM.
Hmm.
So we target STEM holistically, but what we're seeing is that scholars are not interested in the general pathways. When I'm talking about the general pathways, you have mostly like engineering, but it's generic engineering. Nursing, veterinarian, those type of pathways, but they're the reason why that they're interested in that because that's only what they know about. But
Hmm.
the scholars are exposed to career pathways like nuclear engineering or, are a advanced software engineer or scientific manager. They're interested in those careers because they see themselves being able to do it because they know about it. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing the traditional trends of I just want to go to a four-year institution and major in computer science or regular engineering. That is not the case now. Scholars are really trying to identify specific niche areas and create their own paths.
And Dr. Luciana, are you seeing some of the same trend, that desire to be more of a specialist maybe than a
Yeah, that's it.
generalist?
Yeah, very well said. 110%. So here where I am in New York, so the state is actually working towards creating a program known as Portrait of a Graduate. So
Mm.
students are given different pathways, like Chris just mentioned, to kind of how do you want to obtain a high school diploma. And I'm noticing that students are taking different avenues. Students want to focus on the arts. Students want to focus on STEM. Students want to focus on working on TV, all these different careers. And it's interesting that students are taking what they love and they're looking for ways to continue that beyond their years of high school education, post-secondary education, and into the workforce. So I'm seeing a lot of those same trends.
Well said.
Yeah, so that is huge for employers to know, right? But okay, let's transition here for a moment because each of you, so as Christopher mentioned, he's specializing in STEM, and I want to hear a little bit more about that. And I also want to hear, Dr. Lucian, about one of your curriculums. Each of you are working on new curriculum. And I'm really curious, what you're developing, but also why. So, Dr. Lucian, you want to start with your new curriculum?
Sure. So I'm working collaboratively with a few educators, Mr. Michael Castiglia and Mr. Matt Schneider. We're working together and we're creating a peace curriculum. So in light of everything going on in the world, we figured it's important for students K-12 to understand the concept of peace. What is peace? How do you see that in the everyday? And how does that trickle into curriculum and hopefully solving some of the questions and challenges that we have going on in the real world? So we created a three-phase curriculum plan where we look at elementary school, so kindergarten through sixth grade. What is peace? How do we define it? Reading, writing, speaking, thinking, the literacy skills, of course. And then we do the same at the middle grades, grades 6 through 8. And then, of course, at the high school level, grades 9 through 12. So we kind of blend both a historical context, reading about peace, understanding peace, writing about it, different types of conflicts, and really kind of understanding it so that we can help students make sense of what's going on in the world, give them that critical awareness, give them that critical thinking, teach critical thinking, and then, of course, encourage students to take informed action. What do we want students to walk out with and really make positive changes to the communities that they're living in? So that's the curriculum that we're working on right now.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So is this was this born out of research? Was this born out of what students were talking about or wanting or needing? What was kind of the driver behind a peace curriculum?
Yeah, so it really came about just from a simple conversation. We noticed that there's a lot going on in the world, and it's funny, the
Yeah.
colleague that I'm working with, we have like a pretty wide range of areas of expertise. So I'm K-12 and higher ed. I have a colleague of mine and a dear friend who's at the elementary. I have a friend who's at the high school level. So we figure let's kind of combine it and see what are we teaching students in kindergarten and how does that transfer all the way over to 12th grade. So we wanted students to build that critical thinking, that awareness, and kind of take it formed action. But how does this look at from every single grade level? And we continue to build that. So when they leave us and they head off to either post-secondary education or directly the workforce, they're ready. They're active citizens. They're ready to take charge and make positive changes. And students felt like they wanted to do that. They wanted to work on project-based learning and create things that they can hopefully implement in their communities.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. It's like we're seeing a resurgence of the 1960s and 70s, right?
Well
It's
said.
like history repeats itself.
Well said.
Okay, so Christopher, you're working on totally different skill sets.
Yes.
So tell us about your curriculum and why.
Yeah, so we're working on curriculum as we look at industry and we look at the disconnect between our traditional academic systems and where industry is at. One of the things we've identified from research is that scholars are not really getting that aha. And when I say that aha, connecting what they're learning to real world and then connecting what they're learning to see how I can do this in the future. And I go back to that career pathways, and that's why our platform is called Career Pathway Builder. If you have a company over here, company X, and they're looking to hire scholars now and in the future, those scholars don't know those careers exist. And if they know they exist, they don't even know how to get prepared for those careers. So with the organizational side, we're trying to work closely with organizations to have those career requisitions, those job requirements, develop that in a framework so it can be embedded in any classroom. So now every scholar that is interested in whatever pathway, they've been exposed to it over a course of multiple times. So now they're able to start developing a conceptive framework of mind to say, hey, I want to follow this pathway because I'm following the pathway because I've been exposed to it, not because this is the only thing I know. So our goal is to really make sure organizations, businesses, associations, and industry have an alignment of what their need is and a true pipeline and is placed right into the classroom. And now that educator doesn't try to have to figure it out. All they got to do is embed it in their core curriculum and it's project-based, hands-on, and it gives that alignment of opportunity of engagement. So we're really trying to make sure industry is not continue to be disengaged from education.
Yeah. Which is a great transition to my next question because we've heard so much about things like skills gaps and
Hmm.
difficulties with engaging and training and all the things,
Right.
retirement waves. I mean, these have been brewing for a long, long time. So I'm curious to know, are we moving towards a future where more businesses will be aligning with education? And are you seeing this in certain industries or countries? Christopher, I'll start with you.
Yeah, we are moving because more of your top tier businesses are identifying that they have to step out earlier and
Mm,
start doing that outreach earlier. They're understanding that there's a true skills gap, but the
mm,
skills gap is not in such of a way that um, there's a lack of knowing how, there's a lack of opportunity of knowing. And that's the skills gap. When we talk about our specialized area, the specialty areas, that's where the skill gaps are, because you don't know those things exist. So now many organizations are starting to take adaptive and adopt schools and programs to start delivering that. I was in a conference about 2 weeks ago, and BMW, one of the BMW representatives was in there. And one of the things they said is that we started working with third graders now. And
wow.
that's not uncommon. You know, you have your top companies that are your software company, your tech companies, they have advertising and marketing. They're working with elementary schools
Mm,
because they're trying to think forward of saying, hey, if I can expose this scholar and introduce my company and my product, at least that scholar now can make an informed decision that this is my direction. And like it was said earlier, yeah, there are countries that are doing this and adopting it with apprenticeship programs, straight work the program. Germany, to be exact, they have an adopted program where they're going right into the schools and their program is being aligned with the industry. Those are the things that we should be doing in the US. I think one of the things that we have to get away from is the traditional systems of learning. And I want to say that respectfully, but we can no longer continue to base our skills on understanding how to get an A in a classroom versus saying how
mm.
to be successful on a job.
Yeah. So true. I wish some of this education reform was happening when I was young. I would have liked school a lot more.
Right,
Okay. All right.
right.
So, Dr. Lucienne, what are your thoughts on business and education aligning together?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's very important to go off what Chris was mentioning. I'm noticing that a lot of school districts are starting to kind of align with the vocational program, so they're building those partnerships,
Mm,
and especially now with this new pathway that is starting to come down the pike from the states. A lot of businesses are starting to kind of reach out to schools, and they want interns, they want internships for the students, so it's kind of like a win-win on both sides. The student gets the internship and exposure. The employer kind of sees kind of how the generations are starting to come in, and then they make connections and network, and then hopefully they're able to get employment. Of course, like Chris just mentioned, Germany's starting to do that. I've seen it a lot with some friends and colleagues in Switzerland and Austria, in the UK. So they're on board, and I think I agree with Chris. I think it's important that we kind of take a step back from the traditional approach to education and really have students hands-on, more field trips, have students get into the field, have
Hmm.
students learn to do project-based learning, solve real-world problems, and work collaboratively because that is the day and age that we're in. We work together, we talk a lot, and we're in it right away. So I think if we start preparing students and make that connection and that partnership with our local businesses, industries, etc., our students will be even more engaged to be in the classroom because they want to learn those skills because they kind of see, oh, I can get a job based on X, Y, and Z that I'm learning.
mm.
So I think it's a good thing, and I think it's an important move.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we have someone in our audience today that's listening in and they're thinking, well, I want our company to become more aligned, or I want our association to become more aligned with education. What's a good first step? What do you recommend to each of you?
I think it's important to first reach out. I think starting that initial conversation and conversing with either a local higher education institution or even a local school district and just see the conversation, just see what are you looking for and what is the school looking for? How can we build that partnership? Because the higher education and the local schools know the students the best. and companies and industries know their industry is the best, and just having that initial conversation is important. It's a great place to start.
Taking initiative.
Of course.
Yeah.
Christopher, what would you add?
So I would say definitely reach out to the experts. For example, you, Sarah. I think those organizations, associations should reach out to you for sure because you have the pulse on this. You are the leaders in this space, the leader in this space, and you know what's necessary and needed. I think one of the things that's important, we all need to be experts in our area of expertise. Industry needs to stay in their lane and being experts in industry education need, but we need to be able to come together and work collectively. So that's being a part of events like you're hosting your national conference, being a part of these different types of organizations. But at the same time, I think understand that again, we cannot continue to uh, look at certain scenarios to be able to start doing our recruitment of hiring. And we can't also look at this as to say we need to go one direction because no one direction is going to be the right direction. It is multiple ways we need to reach our scholars, and then we start doing that by adopting these programs. One of the things I think that is very important is that each organization should have a school-based model, and they should have that part of their business model.
Yeah.
And that model should be something that they're building that's connected with their local community school that is that direct alignment. So as you have this framework here, that framework is connected and the two are merged together.
Yeah.
Well said.
I really do think that's the future, right? We're living in a different era and we've still been educating students like we're still in an agricultural era
Yes.
for such a long period of time. So, all right. So we're at the Next Gen Now Summit. So my question for each of you, it might be an obvious one, but I think it's important to share your perspectives. Why the Next Gen Now? For those that might be tuning in and just not, wondering why this is an imperative, why it's a priority. Curious to hear each of your perspectives. Christopher, you want to go first?
Mine's going to be simple, Sarah. You said it. Next gen now. We got to act now. I mean, this is the most important thing. If we don't act now, we're going to be at the same conversation 5 years, 10 years from
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
And that is the problem. We react instead of being counteracted. And that's the scenario. One of the things I was in a presentation a while back, and I'm gonna give this example. One of the things our company, we do drones autonomous training, and we get scholars certified to be able to use drones as a commercial solution. And so I was meeting with this workforce agency, and their point of emphasis is say, Christopher, we don't see the in-demand opportunity right now for drones. So we don't see that as a value. They're looking at the emphasis of not what's now, they're not looking at where it's going. We got to
Right.
understand that this is not every career pathway is not immediately going to output a six-figure job tomorrow or today, but tomorrow is already projected. So Sarah, just to sum it all up, you said it now. Why not wait? I mean, it's now. We need to go ahead and do it.
Yeah. Dr. Lucian, what do you think? Why now?
Yeah, I agree. It's important to do it now because we're living in a fast-paced, ever-changing society, and I think as society moves pretty quick, we need to be ready for that. And I think our youngsters are ready. I think they are the ones that have the pulse on what's going on. They are hooked up to every single electronic, all types of media, so they know it quick. So we need to have those conversations with them and really prepare them for, the society that they're going to live in. And we want them to be fully ready, fully equipped to handle any challenge that comes their way and really be active and participate in the world that they're going to be living in. So it's important to do it now because, like Chris mentioned, if we wait, it's going to keep changing and then we're going to keep having longer and longer conversations. So you said it right. It's important to have the conversation now.
It's my honor to welcome to the summit two individuals who I have followed both of their careers for quite some time. I know they're advocates for youth. They tend to be on the cutting edge of trends. Carly and Jank, would you please introduce yourselves to our audience? We'll start with you, Carly.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, Sarah. It's been great working alongside you for the better part of a decade and a half. as you mentioned. I'm Carly Silberstein. I like to say I'm an event entrepreneur. I have had many ventures in the live experience space over my career. Currently, I run CL & Co., which is an event consulting company, and I'm the first outside investor in Shutterbee, which is a technology platform connecting content creators with event hosts.
Very cool. All right. And Jake.
Hey guys, I'm Jeng. I'm the founder of Thread Media and Thread. Thread is a 100% social change focused website, all of which is aimed at Gen Z. We're in about 200 different countries across 17 different languages, talking all things social change and youth culture. And then also threadmedia.com, which is a Gen Z consultancy helping brands reach young people through the power of research and this experience.
All right. Amazing, amazing. Okay. So as entrepreneurs, you have each found ways to advocate for young people. You have revamped systems, developed new ways of doing business, and largely for the benefit of young people. So I would love for you to share some examples of how you've accomplished this, what you've done, how you accomplished this, what you learned throughout the process. So Cenk, we'll start with you this time.
Because so originally Thread was actually something called I Called Kid, and something I've done to be mindful generation was in the changing over from I Called Kid to Thread, it was all about social change because I was quite a big believer that, and this was keep in mind during the time of COVID and everything was kind of just kicking off and the world was not in the best place possible. So I guess my example of that would be the changing of I Called Kid into Thread, the integration of social change and the talk. I used to do a lot of talking about entrepreneurship and hopefully building a platform in Thread where people can see the things that other great people are doing, and hopefully that would inspire and encourage them to do the same things. Because I'm still a believer that no one person can really change the world dramatically, but if you can create a platform or a system in which you can encourage and educate people to make their local areas better, then you can create global change at scale through that. So I think that's probably my my example of that is just the inception of thread.com.
Yeah. Fantastic. Okay, Carly, same question. You also have revamped, innovated, developed all kinds of business models, campaigns for young people. So tell us a little bit about that and what you've learned.
Definitely. So I'll share two examples. Earlier in my career, I co-founded an association management company. And basically, we had a lot of experience working with trade and professional associations. And what we found was it was comprised of a lot of seasoned professionals who had been working in their industry for, 20, 30, 40 years, going on to retirement. And there was a pipeline issue where they were having a hard time connecting with, the millennials, of which I am, and the Gen Zs. And so it really was it was a retention problem and it was also an acquisition problem because if these associations were going to continue to grow and thrive and have a value proposition that the next generation of employees wanted to join and find value in, they really needed to adapt their messaging, maybe some of the channels they were using, their campaigns, really their full value prop to recruit and retain these younger people in whatever industry. So we became the first and for a long time only millennial owned and operated event and association management company. And we attracted young people to the company to serve these associations so that they could leverage technology. Now we're talking about Twitter, which is now X. So, 11 years ago when we started that company, that was hot and we had a full grasp because we were born digital natives. So we were really working with our clients in these associations to attract and retain these younger professionals to their membership-based organizations. So that's kind of one way. And then fast forward to some of the work I'm doing now. Like I mentioned in my intro, I'm an event entrepreneur, anything to do with events, experiences, live iterations of connecting people. So throughout the pandemic, and there's just some demographic shifts happening in society, we have a visibility problem, meaning people don't actually know that you can have a lucrative career in the event and live experience industry because it's not really promoted young enough. So in the past year, I've sat on panels, I've organized events and gotten together with a collective group of colleagues from within the Canadian event industry to try to get awareness to the high school. So, if you're in like grade 7 through 12, get awareness to them that you can have a lucrative career in the event industry. Once you make a decision of where you're going to go for post-secondary, whether that's college or university, it's kind of too late. Typically take your traditional career path. You want to be an accountant, a lawyer, an engineer, now AI and robotics and all this sexy, cool stuff. But there are so many diverse career paths within the event industry. So I have, like I said, some of the examples to try to bring awareness younger is, going into high schools, inviting high school students to intimate events where they can meet and make meaningful connections with industry professionals from hoteling, destination management organizations, event planners, and agency owners like myself to really try to attract the younger demographic and just bring awareness that this industry has a diverse career path. It can be lucrative, it can be fun, it can be demanding, but there's a whole world of opportunity, and it's just that awareness piece.
All right. So when you both started your careers, someone encouraged you to use your voice for change. Someone reached out and supported you. I'm curious to know who it was. And I'm also curious to know what's your advice for other leaders who might want to support young people, make room for them, and they're not really sure where to start. Carly, go ahead and go first this time.
I come from a family, a multi-generation family business, so entrepreneurship is kind of in my DNA. It wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of when I was going to try my hand at it. But when I started my first business, it was my dad and my now husband that really supported me and gave me the encouragement to, throw my hat in the ring and kind of see where it would all land. And then along the way, you just build those relationships, whether it's with clients, with employees, with partners, collaborators, and the ones that just, take a chance on you, even if you're the risky option, and give you kind of a platform to try and fail or try to and succeed. But I've been really lucky to meet some incredible people along the way. And if you build that trust and that authentic, strong relationships and you're transparent with them and open and communicative along the way, I think that you earn that trust, and then they follow you along and give you platforms and opportunities throughout your career. Sarah, you're one of them. I met you. We live in different countries. We, started our working relationship over a screen just like this before the pandemic and before it was a necessity. And then we've met several times in different countries and places around the world and supported each other's careers. So I think it's really about building those meaningful trust-based relationships and earning trust so that you can leverage that and nurture that as you go along.
Absolutely. Thank you, Carly. Okay. Cenk.
I guess the people that encouraged me would be my mum, but it was more like it felt like a natural progression because of kind of I already had this blog and it felt like I was getting older and the content hadn't quite matured. So then that was more like what kickstarted me into really leaning into the change. So I called it the thread and leaning into social changes, the kind of the core thread on the pun. And so I think that was definitely what encouraged me and how that kind of happened. The advice that I would give to leaders on how to like help integrate and give space for young people. I mean, it's kind of like you got to take the biggest risk possible because you have to trust that the young people want to help you as well. And this is so at Thread, at least on the consulting side, one of the biggest things that we do is we create kind of young like Gen Z boards or Gen Z councils, and we put them into companies, and then they effectively do what we would have done in the sense that they help them off a consulting level, on a marketing level, whichever area that they want to be put into, they can help from a Gen Z perspective. So taking a bigger risk with young people, listening to what they have to say, because they do know us better than anyone does. And this was, I feel like a broken record when I say this, but Gen Z knows Gen Z. So taking our advice and taking a bigger risk and allowing us into the biggest rooms because we want to see brands succeed with us. It's not like we want to take kind of brands down. So we also feel a loyalty towards brands that we know are listening to us. And then on the other end of that, if it doesn't happen, then because we're by nature so entrepreneurial, we have so many things at our fingertips now, we very much can just make our own version of the web. And that's why you've seen the rise of the Monzos and the Revoluts of the world, because the HSBCs and the Barclays weren't really listening. Likewise, like the EE and the gift gaffs and stuff, well, because Vodafone isn't accessible for they don't care what all young people think of. And then that's why they had to kind of scram to make Voxy which is then that's a whole different kind of thing. But yeah, I think take the biggest risk possible because we want to help.
Love what you said about the councils and actually giving a platform to the Gen Zs. I was going to contribute and say, we have to take it from performative to actual participation, where we say, like, let's just have like a token younger person sit at the board table and like give their 2 cents and like maybe never use that content or take their advice. But I think what you're doing is really taking it from a performative, let's have representation to actual participation. I think that's key.
There's a very big difference when you say that. And some people say, oh, but we have a young person do our social media. It's like, well, that's not really the same thing. By the way, I've already just noticed your t-shirt. That's really cool.
Oh, thanks. I also love that we're both in white t-shirts.
Yeah, I know exactly.
The young cool peeps.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm left out.
I'll send you one.
All right, thank you. Okay, so as you were talking, I just got to thinking, what are best practices in your areas of focus? So, Jenk, you were mentioning brands that really stand out and are doing a great job appealing to young people. It could be a brand, it could be a campaign, or like Carly in your realm, events or brand or campaign. I'm just curious, when you think about who's doing a really awesome job reaching and engaging that next generation, who pops to mind as a best practice or a trailblazer in this area?
Carly, I might ask you to go first so I can have a second to think about this.
Yeah. So mine's not necessarily brand focused. I mean, I can definitely, spitfire a few brands that I think are doing well, but it wouldn't be applicable necessarily to my industry or what I'm experiencing here. But I think that it's people who are, connecting with the long game in mind. It's not really transactional. It's really about, again, relationship building. Everything that we do, we're in the people business in the events world, right? So it's really not transactional. It is long game and relationship based.
So I think there's traits. I'll need actually a detailed example in a second. So I think as a trait, generally, anything that's authentic, original, and credible works really well with Gen Z. We're very quick to, because we can Google things and we can see if something's just a lie, you can see that quite quickly. So, and then also that applies to, this is why influencers became such an important part of like the gig economy and like the creator economy, and why it's so big now is because people are a lot easier. It's a lot easier to find a person authentic and open and credible because they are a person as opposed to a brand. So yeah, brands that are generally authentic, open, transparent, crucially, do really, really well. Now, the other example I was going to give is brands, specifically older brands that have done really well. Find younger, trusted brands that are already trusted and kind of tag themselves along and in with them in a way which would let them be trusted by Gen Z. Because I think by nature, Gen Z is, I don't want to include myself in this, but kind of quite ageist, and they kind of think less of like big, older corporations and brands by nature. So when, for example, like when Jack Daniels and Coke did a collaboration, they released those little black Jack and Coke cans. That was a really good example of, to us, Jack Daniels used to just be like what your granddad used to drink. Like no one really used to think of Jack Daniels as like a thing that we go out and drink. But then when you release a little can like cocktail and it's with Coke, that's a brand that we trust and love, then actually that brings that Jack Daniels into the conversation. And then the next time you go, you see that and you think, oh, I might get that. Likewise, you have someone like Ramoa and Supreme, who did their collaboration a couple of years back when Supreme was like the most trusted, coolest, like hyped brand for young people. Then Ramoa, which to us was the silver crate looking suitcases at the airport that a bunch of like old people had. Then when those two worlds combine, then it's like, okay, maybe Ramoa kind of know what they're talking about because they're with a trusted brand of ours. And then you have to say, I think the last example was something like Smeg and Disney, where it's like Disney, young people know, trust, love the movies, grew up with them. Then Smeg is like, ooh, Smeg you would have never really seen or taken notice of being like a kitchen appliance company. So then again, the final example there of bringing yourself into the eyes of Gen Z because you've collaborated with a team or a brand or a company that is already trusted within. And that's a good way of avoiding and branching that bridge because older companies have a tougher time reaching younger people.
Right. One more question on this, then I'll move to the final two questions. a common question or concern that I hear from current employers and organizations is we hear from young people they want us to have an opinion on something, or Carly mentioned values. They want us to be very transparent about our values and to be steadfast. And we have such fear doing that. We don't want to get political. We don't want to alienate anyone. We don't want to create divisiveness. So I often hear from seasoned leaders, what are we supposed to do in these situations? It feels like a no-win situation. And I'm curious just strictly from the young person's perspective, why is that? Take a stance, align with values. Why is that so important? And what would your response be to leaders that are grappling with that?
I think that there are a lot of issues that are 50-50, especially like political issues are 50-50. And then I think there are a lot of issues that aren't. So I think that leaning into most of Generation Z aren't going to be like, yeah, but climate change isn't real. Like that doesn't really happen with young people. We kind of all look in the same direction on some issues. We're pretty unified in that sense. Admittedly, some of us are 1 out of 10, some of us are 10 out of 10s. So some people might really, really think a lot more and put a lot more effort into it and have a lot more passion in the issue. But there are a lot of issues where we're pretty well unified. So leaning into those issues, super, super easy, and it doesn't alienate. Now, the bigger point, whatever issue you choose to lean into, I think it's important that you do, because young people, one of the ways that young people kind of become activists is by choosing with their wallet, and they align themselves with companies that they want to. And we're seeing this more and more with, as you see, kind of different companies getting boycotted quite recently. And I mean, that's been happening for years now, but I think that young people want to show what they believe through their wallet. So aligning with values is important, but even more so, actually showing that you believe it by what's the one I'm looking for? Allowing your values to permeate through your entire stakeholder system, and not just saying, for example, oh, like this Easter we're giving 80% of our profit to this charity, because it's obviously performative, especially when you're, for example, like Tesco's is like, oh, we're gonna use recycled plastic. Yeah, but actually, if you look at all the food that you're making, like it has very, very little difference. So, Adidas is a good example of this, where I think they had a huge water project, which it felt a lot more genuine, and it felt like they were self-aware of one of the biggest issues that fashion has on the world. And they said, you know what, we're going to do our bit against this. And likewise, the companies that you see who do well in their social change campaigns also feel like they are aligned in some sense with the values of what they're doing. So when LinkedIn took refugees in and gave them job interview lessons, that makes sense for LinkedIn. When Vans went to undeveloped countries and built skate parks in communities, that makes sense because it's Vans. Whereas when, I'm not going to give a bad example, something like that's bad press, but you can see how some companies do social change for a week or a month, and it's a tag on and it's not related to what they're doing. And I would argue that actually showing that you believe in what you're saying and having it cause your business is even more important than the point you're making itself. It's always more important to have a strong stance than what the stance is in some cases.
I agree. I echo everything that you just said. And I would say it's going back to the authenticity and building that trust. You don't have to have an opinion on everything. I think you need to have an opinion on what aligns to your brand and what is authentically a stance that you take. So, if it's making your clothes from, recycled material and making it done in the United States or in the UK or here in Canada, because that's a local brand. If that aligns to your fashion line, do that. But I don't know that you need to come out of the gate and have a political stance on whatever. If you're not a politically affiliated or a politically charged organization, I think you need to stay in your lane and have it be kind of in your ecosystem to what your brand is and the ethos of that brand. So it's that trust building and that authenticity. I think there's also something to be said about a brand, and you're not for everyone. If you're talking to everyone, you're talking to no one. So, as the Gen Z, it's a massive demographic. So you may not suit some, and that's okay. So there's some principle like 10, 80, 20. So the top 10 are like the influential individuals. The majority 80 are the ones that are like, they're just going to, go with the flow, but you have to influence that 80%. And then the bottom 10 it doesn't really matter whether they buy in or buy out because they're just that bottom majority. I can follow up with the actual scholastic record of who said that, but it's like if you're speaking to everyone, you're speaking to no one. So like stay in your
Yeah.
lane and try to attract those that are aligned to your brand and who you're actually trying to serve and solve a problem for or, be aligned with. And again, it goes back to that authenticity. You're not going to attract everyone. We're not all 7 billion people in the world going to, align behind one brand or one cause or one movement. And I think that the brands need to stay true to who they are, what they're doing, and speak to those that, really align with them and what they're trying to do.
Excellent answers. So right now the workforce is largely trending younger. So your generations, millennials and Zs, and now Alpha is starting to come into the pipeline. And curious to know, where are you seeing employers really lag behind? What do you think is going to change? What do they need to be knowing, doing, preparing right now to make sure they stay relevant and engaging of these new generations that are coming in the fold?
I mean, I can take a crack at this. Again, I was coming from the lens of an industry versus, one particular brand. But I think it's starting with awareness and recruitment and talent pipeline building earlier. So, once you choose post-secondary, college, or university, you kind of already made a decision to go in one direction or another. So I would say to, the HR teams and to the operational teams, start your recruitment and their talent pipeline building earlier.
I think the first obvious one is going to be AI. I think that in the past, when you had like the Industrial Revolution, electricity, and the advent of the internet, all of these massive, like world and life-changing, but more importantly, industry and job-changing things always happened from the top down. It happened to you. The change, if you were at the bottom level, the change happened to you. Whereas now with AI, what we're seeing is that actually, because of the age that we are going into the world, actually AI, the change is happening from the bottom down and the middle out. So it's happening. The people who are the oldest and the most set in their ways are going to be the last ones to lose out. So that's one thing that we're seeing massively, is that for the first time, the people going into the workforce are more advanced and more knowledgeable about the things that are the future than the people who are currently in the workforce, because of how new and quickly evolving the world of AI is right now. So that would be my first point, is that, yeah, that's definitely a change. And then the second one is going to be that Gen Z are we're very naturally different employees to how a lot of them were. And that's because of a lot of things that have happened to all of us by nature of when we were born and what ages we were during those things that have impacted us. We've had 2 world wars, a global pandemic. A lot of us don't really remember 9/11, but most of us will remember the effects of the financial crisis. So then and then plus a couple wars, and then staying indoors for like the 2 most important socially adaptive years of your life, that creates a kind of person and a social barrier which we haven't seen before, and then that expands into a employer-employee relationship. And the way that we see work and treat work on a professional level is different. So we're more likely to want constant feedback. This idea of like a rigid hierarchical structure within companies is quite different from how we see it. There's the idea that like you can't talk to your boss's boss, quite a weird concept for Gen Z. And the idea that you can't, the way I was thinking about it is that we operate on a climbing wall as opposed to a ladder. It's not one way up, one way down, starting at the bottom. It's any way up, across. You can go up and then back down, move across, go back up again. And that can all happen within the same company. That can happen within, apparently Gen Z is going to have like 17 different jobs across 5 different careers. Like we're not static in that sense. And that's even more arguably so because the industries where that was true, like medicine, law, finance, economics, pardon me, that's becoming less of a desirable role to us in the same way that kind of all of these new roles are opening up, especially in AI, especially in the creator economy, in gig work and stuff like that. So yeah, we're rewriting quite a lot of the previous roles.
So this is the Next Gen Now Summit. So naturally, my final question for you is, why focus on the Next Gen now?
I think because you kind of have to. I think that if you don't, you'll get left behind pretty quickly. You've effectively given I mean, you've given us every possible opportunity to create companies at immense speed with a very little lack of cost and no previous knowledge required. You don't need a degree to make an amazing company. And at the end of the day, I think that, and I heard this yesterday, like human gets beat out by human with AI. So if you're an older company, if you're an older person and you don't really think that you're necessarily going to lose, like for example, the example we were talking about was like a hairdresser. A hairdresser might think, "Oh, I'm safe. I don't need anything," because previously the narrative used to be human versus AI, and hairdressers thought, "I won't be replaced by AI because AI can't cut a person's hair." Yeah, but you will be beat by human with AI. Because if a hairdresser takes all of their AI and gets all of their marketing done for them, and all of their social media done for them, and all of their scheduling done for them AI, all of a sudden they can make twice as many haircuts in a day, and then that's how you get beat out. And the same applies with older generations, is that if you aren't adapting at the speed that we can adapt to, you're going to lose out pretty quickly. So either get on board with Gen Z or you're left behind. Pretty dramatic stuff, I know, but yeah.
Totally agree. You said it. Like the next generation is not waiting in the wings, quite frankly. Like they're already here and they're ready to make an impact. Whether it's, again, lack of experience, that doesn't matter. They have the insight and access to tools and a firm understanding of how to use them, that will just open doors for those organizations. So it's better to embrace them, not be performative, to actually give them a seat at the table to make a real impact. You will get left behind if you don't embrace these changes in your structures, in the way that you're operating, in your flexibility, in your authenticity, all of the things that we've discussed. The next gen is here. So the next gen really is now, and those that, embrace it will thrive, and those that don't, unfortunately, will get left behind.
And also more so than any other generation, we grew up being told like you can do anything. Like we've been empowered our entire lives to the point where it almost backfires because the people empowering us are the ones who are then going to suffer because it's their generation that is the ones that we end up
Fantastic. I feel like we could talk for hours. I have many more questions, but our time is up. Thank you so much, Carly and Jake, for being here and for continuing to advocate for the next generation right now. Welcome to the show, Priya and Mike. Why don't you each take a moment to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about where you work and a little something about you.
Hi, my name's Priya Garg. I'm the Chief Engagement and Diversity Officer at the American Osteopathic Association, and I've been working with osteopathic medical students, residents, and new physicians in practice since about 2015. So I have a lot of experience with the new generations coming up, and I'm so looking forward to this conversation. Just to note that any opinions I express are my own and not of my employer.
Understood. Mike.
Hi, thank you. Nice to see you all and nice to be here. My name is Mike Moss, and I serve as the president for the Society for College and University Planning, a role I've been in for about the last 12 years, but I've been in nonprofit management for just short of 35 years. And so organizations in transition from having a very long-term, amazing legacy membership into the next generation of university planners. And so also I'd like to caveat that the opinions made are my own and not necessarily that of Scott, but I'm confident that we will find applications all the way across the board, no matter what.
All right, so you are both leaders who are kind of renowned for being disruptors in your unique individual capacities. And right now, there's a whole heck of a lot of change happening, and a lot of that change is influencing the next generation. But before we can talk about future generations, I think it's important to just pause and say, how do you lead an organization forward? How can you even be next gen thinking? How can you lead forward in a time of incredible change? So give us a little bit of advice and perspective on that. Priya, if you will start us, please.
Absolutely. I think it's really important to understand and figure out your organization's values and mission and where you align with that, and then anchor your decisions to those values and to the mission, while staying flexible on the tactics and things that come out underneath that, but overarchingly making sure that you're all on the same page, because I think that that's so important when you're creating intentional spaces for listening and for collaboration.
Yes, and assuming that you're not all moving in the same direction, but actually knowing for sure, right? How do you make sure everyone's aligned, or that you know everyone's aligned?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would add to that. And a great answer, Priya. And I wish I could do that every day. So the thing that we certainly are trying to do every day is take a step back and make sure that we really do force ourselves into full transparency, meaning that the communication is wide open. It is not title driven. It is in support of our values, which are very much a collaborative, welcoming organization. And in doing that, we found that we have to be really intentional about respecting legacy, but lead with curiosity so that we can be open to creating new traditions. And as we continue to evolve our workforce and welcome in the next generation of leaders, that's, I think, was what's been most important for us, is to make sure that in transparency, we acknowledge today is a hard day. Today,
Yeah.
something happened that we have to deal with, and not just trying to protect it by either role or title, but protect it by organization. And the organization can all be in on how it gets resolved. And also on the flip side of that, when things are going well, tell everyone and tell them that they were a part of it, because that's also part of, I think, our obviously our value sets. So that full transparency piece, I think, actually drives the communications more so than trying to say you're doing communications first. Just lead with transparency, but respect your legacy.
Great answer. And I'm so curious whether small or super significant, what is something each of you, because you're known for being disruptors, what's something each of you would be willing to share that you've disrupted recently?
Well, Priya's got to go first on this one.
Just throw her under the bus.
I know, right? Something new that we've done in the last few years with our governance bureau that represents those younger physicians and osteopathic medical students is something called a collaborative cohort. So we officially, the AOA has governance positions that are appointed by our president-elect every year. But as everyone knows, there's only so many seats that can be filled, but there's so many more that want to get involved with our organization. And so our leadership created a collaborative cohort, which includes anybody and everybody who wants to be involved with the AOA, regardless of whether or not they're even a member. They're allowed to be a part of our collaborative cohort, because we understand as an organization that their perspectives are important, regardless of whether or not they're paying dues. And this has allowed us to create so many more programs that are for those generations and for those people that the Bureau represents, without having to stick with just a few people who get appointed to a position. We get to expand that to hundreds of people.
Wonderful. Okay, Mike, what about you? What is something you've disrupted?
That's awesome, by the way. One of the things I think that I'm very proud of that we've done is that we did present to the board a need for some pretty significant transformation. And in doing that, though, we didn't make it a marketing campaign about, hey, look, we're transforming. We just started the experimentation. And I think what's been great in that is that not everything went really well, which also didn't require a big explanation. And so it created the opportunity for all of us in all roles, all levels, all volunteerism to just start experimenting and doing that curiosity leading. And out of that, we've had a new product portfolio emerge where our courses are now cohort driven as a driven. The instructors and SMEs are obviously there, but it's a community approach to learning now that has developed because we just said, look, we're going to do it differently and see how it goes. But it wasn't a marketing campaign to do transformation. It was an action that we all did together as a community and reacted with one another as we went along. And that's been about a 2-year journey so far, and so far, so good.
Excellent. I like that curiosity leading concept. Okay, so let's talk about next gen leading. And I'm curious to know, when does the next generation or future focused kind of that future focused thinking, when does that influence your decision making? Mike, I'm going to make you go first this time.
It's a really important question because the easy answer, which isn't meant to sound, silly, is every day. So every day when I come into the office, not just because of my role, but because of the responsibility of being a planning-based organization, we are advocating that you must be looking forward. But the thing that we need to be really acknowledging, and maybe it's as simple as a 2-2-2 concept, where what are you doing in 2 months, 2 years, 2 decades? But like keep it moving forward, but it also sometimes needs to be in manageable short-term kind of chunks, right? So as we think about preparing for what's next, is if you're in a 2 week window, it's different than if you're thinking in a 2 year window. But in that 2 year window, you certainly are thinking about who are we designing this for, who's not currently in the room, comma yet. Like who is going to be here in 2 years that we need to be prepared to serve both as an employee and as a member, and then as one another in a community of learning. So I think that as we kind of separate or bifurcate out that planning thinking, it's always on our mind that we're actually doing this for people who haven't necessarily joined yet, people who haven't actually become a staff member yet, or who haven't taken my place or another leader's place yet, but we are designing for them so we want to keep that intentional as we plan forward.
Yeah, that intentional design is so critical to future proofing, not just reacting, but planning, which is what your organization really excels at. All right, Priya, what about you? When does that future focused thinking come into play?
Absolutely. And Mike, I loved what you just said right there. And I want to touch on something that you had mentioned in a previous answer, actually, about respecting legacy, but then also thinking about the community that's coming up and engaging with your organization. And, I would say that specifically in my role, I'm thinking about next generation at the beginning of my decision making because so much of what I do impacts those groups of people within our organization, especially when we're talking about designing those policies, programs, and engagement strategies. I need those people in the room right now because I'm trying to attract them and I'm trying to attract their successors. And so they all know generations change obviously every time, and what is engaging to my generation might not be engaging to the next. And so I need them to come to me to be at the table to tell me, no, nobody uses Facebook anymore. Everyone's on Instagram or TikTok or whatever it is now. And so we have to change the way that we think to attract those newer groups of people that we're trying to get to.
That's so incredibly important and such a underutilized step that I see so many organizations, they just kind of guess, or they might ask one or two people and then make assumptions, but really having those young voices in the room is important right from the get-go. Okay, so both of you have alluded to a couple of things you're doing to engage next gen. Let's expand upon that. So how are you engaging younger generations, and what's your advice to leaders who are really struggling in this realm? So Priya, back to you this time.
Sure. So something that a lot of the tools that we use are things such as town halls. Our current president of the organization holds an open town hall with all osteopathic medical students and residents every 2 months. And so anyone can register and come in and talk about anything they want. And the AOA president is there to listen to them and talk with them, which is fantastic. Other things that we do, we have anonymous input tools where people can provide feedback on a lot of the programs that we have without having to give their names because people get so worried about blowback, right? If I give negative feedback, is this going to affect my career and my future within the profession? And advice that I would give to leaders is to really recognize the change in generations on what they're willing to accept and what they're not willing to accept. And I would say that generations now are looking for real, like my kid said earlier, transparency, real impact, and they want to know where their membership dollars are going and if it's really supporting them. And if it's not, they're going to go to a different direction. And I think leaders right now really focus on loyalty. They think loyalty is what's going to keep someone within an organization. And that's just simply not true with these newer generations. If they don't see the bang for their buck, they're going to go someplace else where they do see it.
Right. The town halls is a great idea. Love it. Mike, what are you doing to engage younger people? And what's your advice to leaders who are struggling?
Well, I would amplify everything that we just heard, and I would add to that, um, and I mean this in a careful and considerate, kind way, but stop talking.
Mm.
Just stop talking and start listening and realize that it's not as complicated as we may imagine. So we often read enough or hear enough that we think, oh, it's complicated for these reasons for these generations, and it's less complicated for these reasons because that's how I work. And we get caught up, I think, in trying to nuance when all you really need to do is listen, because all generations benefit from when we work together, right? And we have a high hybrid, high flex, or we really focus on, as Priya said, they're going to stay for value, both your employee and your members. They're not going to stay because you gave them a lapel pin to wear on their suit jacket, which they may wear twice a year now, right? So paying attention to the nuances of your entire ecosystem, it's all pretty well aligned to value. Some of us of an older generation do have different things that happened along our way that may have us create different value sets or which translate as loyalty. But that doesn't mean it does not also apply to the 25-year-old first-time member. What does apply is value and listening and showing that you listen, including sometimes having to say no. And I think that's the part where we often get as leaders a little, and rightfully so, we get a little uncomfortable, is that the answer is actually not going to happen. But in order to say that, you do need to be transparent, honest, show that you listened, and tell them where the value does lie. And sometimes that may lie outside your immediate service, and be okay with that. One of the things that I would recommend as leaders that we do is know who else can serve in your area, and don't be afraid to reference them, because that will create the value that they will come back when they need you in your services later.
So my next question is two-part, and let's break it down. First question, what is something you're teaching the next generation? Mike.
I hope, but I doubt that I'm modeling the listening very well yet. I'm working on it. But what I am trying to teach them is I'm fortunate to have come up as a certified Lean Sigma um, process thinker. So I'm trying to help with systems thinking and showing that there is actually no independence in work. It's all tied to incomes, outputs, all the stuff that happens together. And really trying to not just teach systems thinking, but show a collaboration connection to that. That if this, then that is a really important way to approach pretty much all your decisions. And hopefully they can then translate that into whatever disciplines and processes come next. But if this, then that, and your thinking, I think, is something I'm trying to impart.
Very cool. Priya, what is something you're teaching the next gen?
I would say it's about something that I try to focus on is that leadership is beyond titles. It's not, I need to be called vice president of something in order to feel like I'm a leader among my peers and my colleagues. It's if you're volunteering for something, even if you're just a member of something and you're saying, hey, I just want to take on more responsibility or something like that, it's learning that you can take on new skills and become someone who is a leader without needing that title, but just showing up, show and committing to what you're saying you're going to commit to and following through on it.
All right, let's flip it now. What is something that younger people are teaching you, Priya?
I would say I would like to think of myself as someone with integrity, but these newer generations are taking it to a next level that I'm really learning about. I mean, they will call you out on anything and everything. And it's like, you don't even, for myself, like I don't even think, oh, I didn't even mean it that way, or I didn't take it or think about it in that way. But now they're making me think twice about a lot of things in a very good way. And I appreciate that so much.
All right, Mike, what's something younger gens are teaching you?
Yeah, I love that. And I do think it's what's always been in governance, right? Is that we train everybody about a duty of care. But as Priya just noted, the duty of care has been beautifully expanded to not just be about those in your time at your work for customers or your members. It's a duty of care, period. And how you can serve through your values as an organization beyond just the borders of your office and the roster of your membership. So very much what Priya said, I've learned to really expand the impact opportunities of not just my organization and my team, but of myself and where I can be of better service and be okay with that. Be comfortable with saying, I'm not going to be here on Wednesday because I'm doing this for the community, and not feeling like that was somehow not okay, right? I really do love this duty of care that they're bringing forward, and it's taught me a lot.
Very cool. Well, this is a summit all about Next Gen Now. And so naturally, my last question for you today is why focus on the next generation now? Priya.
I will say because they're here and they're in our organizations and they're in our communities and they are leading. And whether or not we're ready for it, they're here. And so we have to focus on them. We have no other choice but to focus on them and to bring them into the fold any way that we can and to learn from them and for them to learn from us.
Right. Mike, why the next generation now?
Yeah, and I love that because I do think a big piece of what I've thought about with the next generation now is that it's also time for other generations to follow, not just lead. To Priya's point, is that there's leadership opportunities from experience, but there's also massive leadership opportunities from just being curious. And I think we need to get out of the way. It's time to also follow, not just, teach as we do. No, go do as they say. And I think that's going to be a very powerful opportunity for everyone.
Absolutely. Priya and Mike, thank you for disrupting. Thank you for prioritizing the next generation, and thank you for being part of our summit today.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. Yeah. It's been wonderful.
Yes, thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
I think Steve Jobs said it best when he said that an organization can either be a generation ahead or a generation behind. You can't be both. So here and now, you have a choice to make. Based on the information you heard today, you can begin to adopt some of the ideas that sparked your interest and begin to do things differently on Monday morning, even if it's just one or two things. Or maybe you're just going to take the information, absorb it, and move on. And I hope that's not the case. I hope you make an intentional decision as a result of what you learned today to do things a little bit differently. To start thinking with that generational lens, to start prioritizing future proofing, to really think about community building in new and different ways. Because the future needs you. We're creating the future right now, and the future and future generations really need you. If you liked what you experienced today, you will love the in-person DC Summit. We're hosting an in-person, one-day experience, Washington, D.C., again, bringing together amazing thought leaders to share best practices and have a meeting of the minds on why this topic, why it's important, what we can do to future-proof and community build in new and innovative ways. So use the link on the screen and register now for the in-person Washington, D.C. Summit, October 28th. I hope to see you there. It's gonna be amazing. We did it last year. We're bringing it back by popular demand. Really, truly, you don't want to miss this. Once again, thank you to all of you for tuning in, for making this a priority, and special thanks to all of our presenters who joined us from all over the world to bring their ideas, perspectives, and best practices. And thank you to all of you for making an effort to prioritize the next generation now. See you soon.